I hope you slept well. Everybody has to remain very, very lively today to make sure that those of our comrades with jet lag, who may not have slept so well, stay awake, okay? Especially Joshua, poor Joshua. I think he'd probably come the furthest of anybody, I think, from Manila. I think so, probably. Okay. Just a few things. First of all, by the time we finish this session and you go back out, there will be a bookshop outside. So you can, which is run by a good friend of ours now, a guy called Bob, who runs his own bookshop, mobile bookshop, which specializes in labor and trade union and history and all those politics. So you might find that interesting. Talking of books, you may not recognize this young, handsome man who looks a bit like Marlon Brando. The organization Labour Start has published a selection of essays written by Dan, which you will find if you wish to purchase a copy. You get one of the solidarity price of £5, and they are available on the reception desk upstairs, registration desk upstairs, for £5. You just have to be honest and put in your money and get the change and whatever. Okay, so that's after Dan's spoken. You can go and buy the full works of Dan Gallin. And Rehab would like to say a few words, but I think you're going this morning.
I'm leaving after the tea break. I just wanted to report back. We raised, I think it's over £250 from sales of DVDs and T-shirts. Thank you, everybody. I've got to say, this has to be one of the most successful screenings I've ever done, because we've got commitments from the States, from Manila, from Liverpool, from RMT, from Hyderabad. The list just goes on and on of how many screenings that we were able to generate after last night's screening, and that's the most important thing. And critically, for us, we need to know and advertise the fact that these screenings are taking place, not only to build momentum so we can do more screenings, but also as a form of pressure on our own government and the Commission of Inquiry. And to that end, we have a team who work on this in South Africa, and this is the cards, and I'm going to leave them here. So really, if you do the screening, please keep us informed. We're trying to assist and support you in whatever way we can in doing that. So thank you once again. Yeah, I was sort of, my bag's only so big, so I'm sort of trying to ration this meeting. So I will bring 3 more copies down during tea break. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay, 6 copies. That's it. 7, no.
T-shirts?
Yeah, all right, I'll bring the T-shirts. Since you're such good fighters, and then the trade union movement, I've got to give you stuff.
Just a quick one, just to say that the petition against the privatization of the National Gallery is now online. It's been tweeted and retweeted by GLI, and it's also be on the website. So I'd be grateful if you can push it, in your unions and your countries.
All right. Okay. Well, we'll just say Rehab may come back next year. So this is fantastic. Okay, and I'd now like to hand over to Sanjeev. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning to everyone. Hope you're awake after a fantastic soccer match. I know many hearts broke last night, especially Bangladesh and West Bengal in India. they were very supportive of Brazil, so they will be feeling very bad.
Me too.
Anyway, this morning we are going to discuss about the slow death of Socialist International. So without wasting any time, I'll hand over to the handsome Dan Gallin, the only handsome Dan Gallin, to give you the whole picture. Please.
Oh, thank you, Sanjeev. Good morning, comrades. The Socialist International. The Socialist International is the organization of the world socialist, social democratic, and labor parties, by loose definition, and its headquarters are in London. I'm going to give you a little bit historical background and tell you what has been happening to it more recently, and so we can think about what this, the consequences and what it means for us. The Socialist International is the successor organization of all the historical internationals of the labor movement. The first International Working Men's Association, as was then called, founded in 1864 by Karl Marx and Engels and Bakunin, and which went to die in the United States in 1879. The second, called the Labor International, founded in 1889 in Paris for the centennial of the French Revolution, and which collapsed in 1916 because it split three ways during World War I. It reconstituted itself as a Labor and Socialist International in 1923, and the LSI, Labor Socialist International, did not survive World War II. And the present Socialist International was founded in 1951 in Frankfurt as its successor. At the last count, it had 162 member parties in about 100 countries, and it is now in a deep crisis, which reflects the crisis of most of its members, certainly its most influential ones. And why is this important? Because socialism has been the ideological foundation of most of the world's trade union movement, not necessarily always by the same acceptance of the term. And today we are faced with a crisis of socialism, which is principally a crisis of the meaning of socialism. Social democratic and labor parties have been our historical allies, but this relationship is being seriously strained in many countries in Europe and elsewhere. These parties are no longer supporting the labor agenda. On the contrary, they're endorsing conservative policies which we oppose because they run counter to workers' interests. Trade unions are essentially political organizations, in the sense that everything we do is political. It has political implications and consequences. And for this reason, the trade union movement needs a political framework with a strategy and clear objectives. If you wish, it needs a lodestar. We have now lost our traditional lodestar, and we cannot advance blindly. And this is why we have to understand why this is happening and what our political options are. This is not the first time in history that the partnership between social democracy and the trade union movement has been strained. And the tensions that have arisen have always revolved around relationships and attitudes towards capitalism and the state, but in changing patterns. The first and second internationals were composite organizations, including in the membership any workers' organizations, political parties, but also unions, co-ops, credit unions, educational institutions, and others. That changed in 1901 when a meeting of national trade union centers decided that unions needed a separate international of their own. And thus an international secretariat was established in 1903, which became 10 years later the International Federation of Trade Unions. That was the first purely trade union federation, which in addition to the social democratic unions of the European continent included the British TUC and the American AFL, American Federation of Labor, which had not been part of the Second International, and it also included the French CGT, which was a syndicalist organization at the time, and therefore not a member of the International. So earlier, in fact, starting with the launch of the Second International in 1889, unions in specific branches of industry, like tobacco, mining, transport, had already created their own internationals, the forerunners of today's global union federations. And the more or less informal but generally accepted division of labor at the time was that the International of the Socialist Parties was responsible for ideology and for the political strategy to achieve socialism. The internationals of the trade unions, while sharing this general objective, would be principally responsible for the defense of workers' immediate interests. This put the union squarely in the reformist camp, to the right of the political international. The unions were not supposed to change society. Their role was defensive. And by the way, that was not the view of the revolutionary syndicalist unions, which were strong in Southern Europe, in the Americas, and initially in Japan, which believed that it was precisely the task of the unions to overthrow capitalism by the means of the general strike, of the insurrectionary general strike. But that is a different chapter in our story. So, in the political international, meanwhile, serious differences had developed on strategies to achieve its main objective, to bring about a socialist society. To keep it simple, the concept that socialism had to be achieved through a revolution, that is, by organizing the working class to take over state power, forcibly if need be, was opposed by those who believed that it could be done by ensuring a parliamentary majority, and others who believed that a socialist society would be the outcome of the natural evolution of the capitalist system. And very few social democratic trade unions subscribed to the revolutionary option, generally supported the reformist tendencies. The First World War again changed the picture drastically. Instead of opposing the war as they had solemnly committed themselves to do only 2 years before, the leading parties of the Second International supported the government, and the International collapsed in 1916. It was reconstituted with difficulty in 1920, but in the meantime, the radical left had brought about a revolution in Russia. The Bolsheviks, who rapidly emerged as a leading party, renamed Communist Party, had established within 4 or 5 years a one-party state and driven the Social Democrats and others into exile or underground. In Germany, a revolution by the Social Democratic left was suppressed by a Social Democratic government, and its leading theoretician, Rosa Luxemburg, with others, was murdered by right-wing militia acting on the mandate of that government. So, the reconstituted Labour and Socialist International had immediately to face not only challenges on its left, but also a far more dangerous challenge on its right, the rise of fascism. Portugal and Italy were lost in the 1920s, Germany, Austria, and Spain in the 1930s. And in that situation, the trade union movement emerged as a much stronger base of resistance. During the First World War, the International Federation of Trade Unions and the International Transport Workers Federation had established a joint liaison office in Amsterdam to maintain international trade union contacts despite the deep political splits created by the war. And at its first post-war Congress, the IFTU elected Edo Fimen, one of the co-secretaries of the liaison office, who was also acting general secretary of the ITF, transport workers, as general secretary. Fimen was a very important person in the history of the trade union movement. He was a Dutch revolutionary socialist. He left his position in the IFTU in 1923, but remained general secretary of the ITF and its allies, notably the IUF and its then general secretary, Jean Schäferstein. And this became the main trade union force of anti-fascist resistance, including anti-fascist protests in Italy. They hired planes to drop leaflets over Milan and so forth. The construction of an extensive illegal resistance network of transport unions in Nazi Germany. That was mostly railway workers, the network of the railway workers. Support for the socialist resistance against the clerical fascist dictatorship in Austria after 1934, and assistance to the Republican forces in the Spanish Civil War. The ITF hired ships that were bringing supplies and arms to the Republican forces. At that time, the ITF and the international trade union movement was clearly on the left of the political international. At the outbreak of the war, immediately following the Stalin-Hitler Pact in 1939, the ITF General Secretary Fimen organized the move of the ITF from Amsterdam to London, and he said the ITF is taking part in the war not to back England and France, but to oppose Hitler and his open and secret allies. And by the way, Fimen also wrote a very premonitory book called Labor's Alternative, the United Socialist States of Europe, or Europe Incorporated. And in that book, he actually anticipated all the problems we're having with Europe at this time. In any case, in 1940, in the middle of after the beginning of the war, the Second International closed down. After the war, the parties which have been members of the LSI founded the Socialist International as its successor, and in Frankfurt in 1951. And the context again was wholly different. This time, it was the Cold War. And in Western Europe and Japan, liberal capitalism had been consolidated with the sponsorship and the support of the United States, the new hegemonic power of the West. And the Soviet Union emerged as a rival hegemonic power, having occupied Eastern and much of Central Europe. A brief attempt to create an all-inclusive global trade union movement reflecting the wartime alliance between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union ended in a new split. The IFTU had dissolved in 1945 to clear the way for the creation of the World Federation of Trade Unions. But that proved to be an artificial top-down construct which proved unable to overcome the unresolved differences between the Soviet bloc organizations and the former IFTU members. So in 1949, the latter, supported by the international industrial federations, created the International Confederation of Free Trade Unions, leaving the WFTU as an organization of the Soviet bloc and its allies. And in that context, the objective of seeking a progressive alternative to capitalism had dropped off the agenda of both the Socialist International and the international trade union movement, even theoretically. Both had settled for the role of junior partners in the administration of post-war social compromise in the industrialized world, basically the welfare state in an expanding capitalist economy. The flagship of European social democracy, the German SPD, the Social Democratic Party of Germany, at its Congress in Bad Godesberg in 1959, abandoned the remnants of its Marxist ideology and declared itself to be a people's party, no longer a class-based workers' party, and other parties followed. Nevertheless, relations between most of the trade union movement and the Social Democratic Labour parties remained close, implicitly or explicitly. And under conditions of expanding capitalism, ensuring relative prosperity for most of the population, and I'm talking about the industrialized countries here, this was not difficult. The hard part came later in the 1970s. But meanwhile, the Socialist International, unlike its predecessors, had developed into an institution without serious organizing functions. It more like a club for leaders of its mostly European members. The major social democratic parties, like the British Labour Party, German SPD, French Socialist Party, etc., had their own international agendas, dictated by national priorities, and they were not prepared to concede to the international either the authority or the means it would have needed to create an international consensus or to develop a common international organizing strategy. The parties which would have needed such international, a strong international with organizing function, the weak, persecuted, exiled parties had no power in the organization. Then, under the presidency of Willy Brandt, from 1976 to 1992, the SI, Socialist International, tried to become less Eurocentric and to open up to the world. Then its membership increased rapidly. But the way this was done, unfortunately, many of these new members had a very distant towards socialism and any recognizable form. They included, for example, the governing parties of Mexico and India, the originally progressive and even revolutionary, at that time deeply corrupted authoritarian, and worse, the governing parties of Tunisia, Egypt, instruments of personal or military dictatorships. So, within the last decade, the SI leadership has been facing mounting criticism from its core membership, the European Social Democratic Party. The current SI president, Georgios Papandreou, is the leader of the Greek PASOK, a social democratic party which has been collapsing as a result of its participation in the present coalition government, which is enforcing the austerity policies of the Troika. The Troika is the European Union, the European Central Bank, and the International Monetary Fund. The General Secretary of the International is Luis Ayala, a Chilean from the Radical Party, a small social democratic party which was part of the Allende coalition. He was first elected in 1989 and has been re-elected since. And they are criticized for undemocratic procedures, for lack of financial transparency, the incapacity of meeting present-day challenges, like the economic crisis, its causes and consequences, and finally tolerating the presence of dictatorship parties in the international. Quite unfairly, as we will see. Now, matters came to a head at the 24th Congress of the Socialist International in Cape Town in August-September 2012, where the reformers, essentially the European Social Democrats, ran a candidate for General Secretary against Luis Ayala. This candidate was Mona Sahlin, former president of the Swedish Social Democratic Workers' Party and a former minister in Sweden. And she lost with 36 votes against 46 to Ayala. And at that point, the so-called reformers decided to create a parallel organization, officially launched in May 2013 at the 150th anniversary celebration of the SPD in Leipzig. The name of this new body is the Progressive Alliance. And 69 parties out of the 162 which are members of the SI have joined this new Progressive Alliance. This is not quite a split, not yet, because the member parties of the Progressive Alliance have remained members of the SI, but they've drastically cut their contribution. The SPD, for example, which contributed £100,000 per year, now pays £5,000. The French Socialist Party cut its contribution by half, down to £45,000. The Swiss Party now pays £1,000 instead of 10,000 as previously. So, since the Progressive Alliance member parties accounted for 85% of the dues income of the SI, the SI is now facing a financial crisis in addition to its political crisis. But what is striking about the Progressive Alliance is how similar it actually is to the Socialist International. Sigmar Gabriel, the president of the German SPD, was very indignant publicly in March 2011 about the presence of dictatorship parties in the SI. And this indignation was actually triggered by the Arab Spring. Without the Arab Spring, probably nothing would have happened. And it raises the obvious question of why it took him and others 20 years to become aware of this. These parties, including Egypt and Tunisia, were all accepted into membership by the SI governing bodies, after all, in the 1980s, and only expelled in 2011, 3 days after the fall of Ben Ali in Tunisia, and after the bloody repression of the popular uprising in Egypt by the Mubarak regime. So, other dictators whose presence is now considered scandalous, Daniel Ortega of Nicaragua, José Eduardo dos Santos, President for Life of Angola, Laurent Gbagbo, former President of Ivory Coast, now before the International Court of Justice to answer for crimes against humanity. All those were accepted in the ISI by the same parties which now constitute the Progressive Alliance. Furthermore, no lesson has been learned. The South African ANC, riddled with corruption up to the presidency, and 1 year after the Marikana massacre, was invited to the Leipzig event. The other striking feature is, of course, the disappearance of the socialist reference in the name of the organization. The key words are now progressive and democratic, with socialist and social democratic very much in the background. And I think one purpose of jettisoning the socialist terminology might be to open the way to the American Democratic Party to join. At one of the early meetings of the reformers in Rome in December 2012, Peter Shumlin, governor of Vermont and president of the Association of Democratic Governors, was invited and attended. The Progressive Alliance has issued a mission statement, which is a shallow collection of generalities and commonplaces, which could be signed by any progressive or Democrat with modest ambitions. There's no analysis of the world situation, no mention of any means by which the progressives might achieve their objectives, no mention of power relations that condition political and social action. And so the Progressive Alliance clearly has no enemies, it only has friends, and these friends include the employers. Because one of its meetings in October last year in Stockholm, with the support and participation of the Swedish LO, launched the idea of the global New Deal between capital and labor. There was a report, apparently, but neither the report nor the discussions have been made public. There's nothing on the website, there's nothing anywhere else. And there's reason to fear the worst, a relaunch of the social partnership ideology, this time with the backing of an international organization of so-called progressive parties, offering its cooperation from a position of weakness. In other words, bringing to the table an official act of surrender of any recognizable socialist principles or objectives. So in summary, what seems to have happened is that a coalition of SI member parties, taking advantage of the mistakes of a dysfunctional secretariat and ignoring their own co-responsibility in these mistakes, took the opportunity provided by the Cape Town Congress to take a further step in what might be called the de-social democratization of social democracy. And its transformation in what can best be described as social technocracy. And the Progressive Alliance is in effect a bureaucratic operation which is not related in any way to any real social movement. It is a de-social democratized SI, even more removed from really existing class struggles, even while it tries to involve the more accommodating parts of the international trade union movement, in this instance, the ETUC. Now, where does this leave us? This time there cannot be any doubt, we are on our own. In most countries, the historical alliance of the labor movement, of the trade union movement, with international social democracy has ceased to exist. This does not mean that socialism is dead, far from it. However, what it does mean is that the trade union left has to reinvent socialism for itself, and on its own terms. And this is a necessity because, as I said earlier, the trade union movement is deeply political. Everything we do is political, and we need a political framework to advance. Our members have no other place to go. This framework can only be based on the class interest which we are supposed to represent and which we exist. I mean, which is our only reason for existence to represent. And this is not a simple undertaking. This is not a simple undertaking because the situation is different in each country. Our potential allies in the reconstructing socialism as a culture, as a method of struggle, and as a vision for global society, our allies in such potential allies in this project will not necessarily be the same everywhere. And we have to reflect on the fact there are, of course, many political parties or groups on the left of social democracy in the whole world. In Europe in particular, the left socialist parties. I leave aside the sects because the dead end. But we have to reflect on the fact that the parties to the left of social democracy are not gaining any traction. The elections in Europe, in any case, are showing that with a great and wonderful exception of Greece, there is nowhere else where these parties are advancing. Instead, the far right and the fascist parties are advancing. And we have to think why that is and what we can do about that. Some of our allies will come from social democratic and labor parties that have not entirely given up and where pockets of the left survive. Others will come from those who have lived through sectarian experiences and have rejected them, have survived them, have retained the energy for struggle and have not forgotten the original purpose of the exercise. And others yet may come with some of the long forgotten heritage of revolutionary syndicalism, suddenly relevant again. And from many experiences converging towards a common purpose, I believe we are creating an invisible international. Part of what we are doing right here is working to create the invisible international. Growing within the shell of the old, as the IWW used to say, and we will create our own path by working together, recreating the really existing socialism in our hearts and in our minds, the only place where it ever existed. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dan. I don't think in such a short time we can anywhere get such comprehensive historical, evolutionary information the way you presented it. Thank you very much. It was wonderful, and the floor is open for questions, comments, experiences. So, yes, please.
Thanks for that, comrade. Brian Simpson from Unite here in the UK. I very much agree with you, comrade, that we need to reconstitute, we need to rethink a political reconstitution, because for me, across the world, not just in Europe, social democracy has failed our workers, has failed our people, and we need to rethink where we go with that. But my question is, how can we go about developing that political reconstitution when many of our members are frankly taken by not only the right-wing propaganda, but also the bastardisation of social democracy. They're still taken by the Labour Party, they're still taken by UKIP and the British National Party, just to talk purely about Britain. And also, how do we go about that reconstitution when our leaders, who cut their teeth in the last bastions of social democracy, how do we go about convincing them that they need to remove their feet from under the table and leave the tent altogether? They must leave the socially democratic parties. How do we convince them when they still have a very naive, in my view, a very naive approach to working with social democratic parties?
By running summer schools. No, look, I think we have to look at what the right has been doing. I mean, the neoliberal right, Milton Friedman, etc., were unimportant academic sect not so long, a few decades ago. And how did they got ideological hegemony? And by putting a lot of money into think tanks, the numerous reactionary think tanks all over the world, particularly in the United States and in Europe, and by creating public opinion, publications, conferences, seeding newspapers, etc., etc. Now we haven't got money, but we've got organization. So in some way we have to be able to organize to create our own networks and work out. I mean, go back to our sources, go back to our classics, find some inspiration in some dissident in school of thought. I mentioned revolutionary syndicalism. There's also G.D.H. Cole and guild socialism, etc., etc. And we just have to put as much effort as we can, each in our own area and our sphere of activity, in this political and ideological work. And it's going to be a long haul. It's not. I hope the world still is not going to be destroyed before we manage to save it. But I think there's no way, there's no shortcut past that work, that ideological work.
Yes, it took us 150 years to reach here. We still have a long way to go. Yes, I saw some hand here.
Yes.
Maybe we take 2-3 questions at a time. Can I see hands? Yours? 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, this one first. Yes, please.
Leon Broom on RMT. A question about, you spoke about reformists. I just wanted your own, I guess many of us may have our own ideas of it, but I just wanted you to articulate, when you counterpose sort of reformist demands with transitional demands as part of a wider movement towards democratic socialism. So when is it reformism, when is it transitional demand? And similar to the question before, it was just an idea about, I think you talked about democratic socialist political organizations are losing traction, have no traction right now, and you've got the social democracy kind of organizations which have a bit more. I don't know if you were sort of suggesting that we should, that because that sort of democratic socialism thing on the left is sort of collapsing dead, that the greatest hope is the watered down version of it. But because I think it's important, like you said, you need a political framework, like a North Star. You need something to be, guiding us towards. So I don't know if you can develop on that idea, if that makes sense. Did I articulate the question well? No. All right, forget the second question.
Can we have some more questions? Yes.
I think from reading about and watching the news about what's happening in Europe in terms of the fight against austerity, and increasingly other parts of the world, the global south, I don't think we're doing too badly. We've seen millions of people. Biggest demonstrations in the history of Portugal have been led by the trade union movement, and in many other European countries, particularly we look at in terms of post-war mobilization, huge mobilizations, trade union mobilizations. But those mobilizations have been largely controlled by a leadership, and I would agree with Dan, which are essentially politically bankrupt. Social democracy no longer is making any promises. Any promises that it does make are premised on the ability of the capitalist system and the market economy to grow. And over the last 6 years, we haven't seen any growth, we've only seen recession. That will continue to bring in huge sections of the working class into conflict with their governments. as they continue to press on with these bankrupt austerity measures. And wherever we are in the world, we will be faced with them. Now that is where the hope lies for the alternative, for a genuine socialist alternative to emerge and grow strong within the trade union movement. It's when people enter into struggle and start winning those struggles, are not held back, are strong enough to push over and beyond the limitations the trade union leadership and bureaucracy are placing these titanic struggles that are going on. And I think that's what we need to look to. And yes, that means what we do every day, how we identify those fighters, those militants in the workplace who are interested more than just fighting in the workplace, and are confident to start thinking and acting on the world we live in.
Joshua from the Philippines. I actually think that Dan was not, obviously Dan wasn't joking when he said that this, what do you call this, summer school. Summer school is actually a way to build the new left, no? Inside the labor movement. I really believe that. I think we are in for a long haul of spade work and developing a new narrative, you know, for all of us. However, in doing so, and I agree, we should do so while in battles. You know, it's only by fighting ahead that we start forging a consciousness. And I agree in all those things, but I think for many of us, at least particularly in my own experience, we have been so busy fighting left and right and trying to win battles that we actually forgot developing ideology. You know, so I think that's one of the biggest errors that we should start learning. You know? But at the same time, and this is now my struggle, and this is why I'm speaking right now, because one of the things that we're trying to grapple with back home is that we wanted to build the left, rebuild the left that's within the labor movement. You see, the dilemma for me, so that you understand, my dilemma is that I came from a tradition where the socialist organization is external to the labor movement. I mean, many of our members are members of the labor movement, but we are outside of the labor movement. I think one of the biggest problems that we did is that we were so arrogant to think that we had, you know, we are the advanced subsection of the working class. So we started thinking and acting as if we're the vanguards, you know, and therefore starting having this undemocratic relationship with the movement, with the trade union movement, with the labor movement. Now, if we reproduce that kind of a cater system inside the trade union movement, how do we avoid replicating the same problems that we've had when we were outside of the labor movement? I think that's a real dilemma for me. You know, how do we do that? We've had a quick discussion with some of the comrades. I had quick discussions with some of the comrades yesterday. I think they're saying that we're doing the right thing. No? We're trying to build committees or make it part of a structure of the trade union movement, and therefore it is accountable to the trade union movement, and therefore not a secret organization, not a secret section, but still developing that consciousness that you, and trying to avoid having that arrogance is, I think, the biggest challenge for us. And so if you have any answers to my question, please approach me and tell me how to do it.
Just take one question from Guru, then we ask Dan to respond.
I have really a question for Dan, because that's an excellent observation of the development of the international socialist organizations over the decades, but it looks to me it's done like from an outside. But Dan is, to my knowledge, is one of the active members of the social democratic movement inside, and the veteran of the Swiss Social Democratic Party, which Dan belongs for 55 years now, if I'm not mistaken. You described that in this discussion in the Socialist International, the Swiss Social Democrats played kind of special role and tried to present the alternative, which turned out not to be an alternative. But what's your vision of the Swiss social democracy and its role in the international arena? Can something be stimulated from within the party? I would say, within our party in Switzerland, yeah, that's basically why this was Swiss, which were leading this discussion on the international level.
Shall I respond now?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, actually, my party, your party, Social Democratic Party, is a pretty special case which has to do with Switzerland, with the structure of Switzerland. First of all, the federal, very developed federal structure, which means that in effect we have 26 parties in Switzerland. Socialist parties, Social Democratic parties, and not one. In each canton are different. In Geneva, you know very well that in Geneva we can do what we like. I mean, you are a self-declared anarcho-syndicalist, and the Socialist Party in Geneva has no problem with that. You're very welcome. My original political tradition is not exactly social democratic either, but there are spaces, and also there are left tendencies in the party, and in fact, at the last party congress, the left won against the platform. I mean, the leadership had proposed a program which was pretty weak. The counter proposal was drafted by mainly people in Zurich, the Zurich left, but endorsed by various lefts in the party. And we won. We won the Congress, the majority of the Congress adopted our version and not the leadership version. So it's a fairly open party, and it's a broad church, tolerates all kinds of tendencies and views, and this is not the case for other parties, for some other parties in Europe. But in any case, I also think that in talking of Switzerland, I think that the real left opposition in society is Union. Is a union. It's the biggest union in Switzerland, which acts almost as if it were a party itself, although most of its leaders are also members of the Social Democratic Party. Then you have the French situation, where the French Socialist Party is falling apart, and myriad tendencies. Its relationship with the trade union movement has never been strong. I'm not an expert on Britain. There are lots of experts on Britain here, and I'm curious to see how the relationship between the Labour Party and the union is developing. And
that one's like one.
So the situations vary, but for example, in Belgium, the largest regional organization of the FGTB, which is a socialist trade union federation, has broken with the Socialist Party, has declared itself independent of any Socialist Party, and has declared its intention to work for a new Workers' Party. So it has been joined in that by some of the by the largest union in the Catholic Confederation. So here too, some rearrangement is happening, political rearrangement is happening. I could go on, but anyway, the picture is that there are different situations in different countries, but overall, I think it's true to say that social democracy is pretty dead, and the only real argument that's coming forth is with the others it would be worse. And that it's becoming a very weak argument.
All right. We have exceeded our time, but since the discussion is very good, so we can take some, maybe the last round of questions. Yes, please.
Thanks. It feels to me, with all due respect, Dan, that one thing that's been left out in your analysis is what was called in the 20th century the national colonial question. And that specifically the Second International parties and the Socialist International parties were absolutely terrible on the national colonial question. The French Socialist Party, as you know, oversaw the suppression, or the attempt to suppress the Algerian Revolution. The British Labour Party was absolutely treasonous in the aftermath of World War II. And it seems to me that when we're looking at the crisis of social democracy and the crisis of the union movement, that somewhere in there, the whole national colonial question and the North-South issue has to be inserted. I would argue, in fact, that part of the treason of these parties is directly related to the extent to which they embraced empire. And that's an issue that we often don't want to talk about. I know in the United States, we often don't want to talk about because people will be not quite locked up, but will be excluded from discussions. But it seems to me, certainly in a setting like this, that we have to somehow put this issue of empire, the national colonial question, right in there and understanding how is it that these parties degenerate? How is it that these labor movements that committed themselves allegedly to internationalism actually, I would argue, to a great extent betrayed it?
Good point. Yeah. Good point. And actually, I should have brought this in when I was talking about Fimen, because Edo Fimen and the ITF and the interwar years were the only international trade union federation that made serious attempts to go outside of Europe, created an Asian and African secretariat, and Fimen personally went to India. He went to Japan and to China. He tried to get into India and Indonesia and was refused permission by the colonial authorities. So he couldn't visit those countries. But he was in Japan and China, and anyway, it's a long story, but you're right. This is a very important aspect.
Thank you.
Khalid and the gentleman here.
Yes, Khalid from Pakistan. I would like to know Dan's view about the left unity process going on in some countries, like we have in Pakistan. There are different trends from left who are coming together, and they are also trying to build the labor movement. But the problem is that even if they are together, but with their past ideologies or with their backgrounds, I mean, the most destructive thing which is happening is that to control the trade union movement from outside, that is the old Stalinist background strategy. And these people are, although they are in the left unity, they believe in left unity, but their strategy is to control the trade union movement from outside, and that is really not helping to develop the trade union movement. Is this kind of experience happening in other parts of the world as well? And what is your view how the trade union movement or the labor movement respond to the left unity?
To what? Left unity. To the left. Oh yeah. One more, the last question, gentleman here. Yes.
Yes, thanks. Peter Rossman from the IUF. It's certainly true that there's been mass resistance in Portugal and Greece. But the most striking thing is the fact that none of these mobilizations have actually secured anything. They're being defeated one by one. If there is not a political alternative in Europe and more widely, the resistance in Greece will ultimately run out of steam. And the fact is that social democracy is evidently politically bankrupt, so too is much of the leadership of the trade union movement, because it too has nothing to offer other than the kind of vague generalities and the calls for a New Deal and a renewed social partnership that are coming out of this rump Socialist International. And I think it's very important to look at the electoral success of the right, not only in Europe, but on a wider scale. They are seizing on issues, they are proposing alternatives, and the slogans, because they've essentially become slogans of the left, have increasingly less credibility with working people. And I think that is the crisis that we, as socialists, as left militants in the labor movement, are facing. If the left doesn't organize people, the right will, and the right is advancing, not only in Europe, look at the Middle East and North Africa. It's absolutely catastrophic. There's a total collapse of the political left there as well, with some exceptions, again. But I think globally that is the trend. So I would just urge us to look a little more deeply at the profound depths of the crisis we face. It's not enough to denounce austerity. We have to propose a credible alternative.
Okay, since no woman has spoken.
Is it?
Yes, yes. Only men.
Well, I just want to say that I've never been in a political party, and many have tried to recruit me, but they've all failed to convince me they had a project. And we talked about, we neglecting ideology. I personally believe that there is an ideology that can unite people and be the future. It's eco-socialism. Because at the end of the day, yes, we want socialism, yes, we want to change the world, but the planet is dying. And I think this can unite North and South and really a wide project. And I think that's what we should focus on to, unite socialists across the world. And that will really provide a new project that hasn't been tried before. So let's get on with it.
Well, just the point that Khalid made, I'm totally opposed to outside control of the unions, political or otherwise, including when I say we need a socialist program, I don't mean that we should be in any way a transmission belt for some union calling itself from some party calling itself socialist, nor should we attempt to create. I think it's. I mean, as a socialist, I wouldn't want my party to control any union. I think our duty as socialists is to support the democratic, all attempts to redevelop the trade union movement on a democratic basis from below and on the basis of rank and file control. And as much as possible, and so forth. And I think that is our duty as socialists. And I think as in any event, I think the transmission belt theory of trade unionism is finished anyway. I mean, I don't think it's coming back.
All right. Okay, just last question from Jinsuk.
I'd like to agree with what Peter is saying, because I think that what we're failing to really do is look at
Could you speak up?
Sorry, I think one of the important points that Peter brings out, and we need to look at as we plan for the future, is why the right is winning. And we have to look, and the right is also appealing to our members. So if you look at many countries where you have this rise of right-wing or conservative and anti-immigrant, very xenophobic parties in Europe, outside of Europe, they're actually attracting our members. So we have to look at what messages they're giving, what strategy they're doing. It's not an issue just to criticize the right, it's also to really analyze the messages they're doing so that we can also be able to counter. In some ways, especially I think in the United States, there's been a lot of analysis done to look at why the Republicans have gained so much. they've actually copied much of what the trade unions have done in terms of how we outreach to our connectors, how we outreach to the rank and file, how we can outreach to the communities. They copied our strategy and just twisted the messages around. So I think that as we look at how trade unions work in terms of building a very progressive or a worker agenda, we also have to look at how conservatives are also doing the same thing. Because if we don't know what they're doing, then we can
All right, James, so thank you. Sorry, I have to stop here. If you have a quick thing to add. Yes, just
Yes.
last one, just
Yeah.
since we're
I think there is it's 3 points compared with yesterday's discussion. We need to first take the power with the alternative,
okay.
and the alternative is a quick movement from below. But the reality, for example, in Asia, the mass and the workers still less educated. So how? It's I think if we want to new one, if we want new strategy, we have to learn from the past. But I think not from the past. It's all bad. I think we have also bring the good point from the past. And another strong point also is the commitment to win, struggle to win, still win. It's a good point because we will never stop to try. With this points, so what is the role of left political party of the unity of the left to from this what we should do? Because we need to change, we need to fast, because the destruction is very getting worse and worse. At the same time, we also have to learn fast, and we have to manage a lot of difference, a lot of the variation of the variety of ideology, the variety of methods. I think it will be very rich, and if we can get the point, I think it will be very positive.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry I have to stop here. The moderation is a really bad job to do. I know many of you still want to speak. Just quickly to sum up, I think what came up and what I strongly also agree. In Asian context, there are young people coming out, energetic, wanting to do something. But I agree with Joshua completely. We need a political ideology, and we need schools like this to build up that political ideology so that all that energy is captured in a certain direction and has a clear mission and vision. But only thing I don't want is it shouldn't take next 100 years for us to achieve something. See, we have been trying for past 100 years. It has been coming together, breaking apart, coming together. What hasn't broken apart is the capital. It is evolving, it's changing and getting stronger and stronger. And I also like the point about not missing out the colonial past. I think it's very important for us to understand how it has played on the unity or not unity. And lastly, the point put on the eco-socialism. I think that was also good. So we stop here and move to the next session. Thank you very much. Thank you all for your contributions. Thank you guys.